This episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by Byron Seeds. The folks at Byron Seeds believe organic requires a different perspective, plan, and approach. Organic isn't simply a different type of product or even a different way of farming. It's a different way of thinking, planning, commitment. It's a different philosophy on how to feed the world. Many won't understand, but the people at Byron Seeds do. We're owned by organic dairy farmers. We not only have the product, but we plan, manage, and execute organic. We speak your language, we share your struggles, and we laud your successes. Organic isn't a way of doing business, it's a community. We learn from each other. We're in this together. We'd be glad to talk cropping plans, management systems, the road to profitability. We understand what you're trying to do. We're farmers just like you. Visit us at byronseeds.net or give us a call at 800-801-3596. And thanks to Byron Seeds. This episode is also brought to you by Mercaris. Mercaris produces the most comprehensive, trusted market analysis for organic and non-GMO agriculture. Do you have farm gate prices? If so, Mercaris invites you to join our farmer network, contribute your prices, and get access to the best information to run your farming operations. Get started by visiting us at mercaris.com/farm_gate_survey. And thank you to Mercaris. This is Brian Wood with Back to the Roots podcast, and today you're listening to the market report for July. And most of you might be familiar with Ryan Corey from Mercaris, who has been with us for the last year or so, and he's moved his responsibilities of talking to me every month over to Megan Thomas, who is an economist with Mercaris. And Megan, we really appreciate you being on and looking forward to hearing your voice in the future on this podcast. And if you don't mind, we can kick it off with the July market report and the weather conditions that are happening around the country.
Thanks, Brian. So looking at the month of July, the main topic of concern this month is continued drought conditions across the United States. So we've seen drought improve in some regions, but still continue to pose a significant challenge for key crop producers in other areas, especially for organic food wheat producers. So taking a deeper look at weather and crop conditions across the U.S., a major area of concern is the U.S. West Coast. So looking at the West as a whole, nearly 3/4 of the region, or about 64% of the West Coast, is still in extreme drought through this current week of July. And this is up from the previous week. Also, we're seeing about 28% of the West Coast is still in exceptional drought, which is also up from last week. So this region has continued to experience extreme heat, especially in the Pacific Northwest region. We've seen some drought areas intensify. This is causing some organic food grade wheat crops to mature at a faster pace in some of these extremely dry areas. Some of the states that we are more concerned about are Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, mainly because of the volume of organic food grade wheat that's produced there. So last year, Montana alone produced nearly 200,000 acres of organic spring wheat. And this is followed by California, who produced nearly 30,000 acres of organic winter wheat during 2020. So we've seen some small improvements in parts of Montana, also in New Mexico due to rains, but the moisture there just hasn't been sufficient enough to get these states out of the extreme conditions that they're in. A few other states of concern in the West Coast especially for organic feed corn and organic food wheat crops, are California, Arizona, and Utah. So these three states are still experiencing some of the worst drought conditions. The majority of these states remain in D3 to D4, extreme to exceptional drought, through the second week of July. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on this region. Another area of concern for organic feed corn and beans, and also food wheat crops, is the High Plains region. So about 19% of the High Plains remains in extreme drought, and this is higher compared to the previous week. Also, 5% of the High Plains region is in exceptional drought, which is about even with last week. And this is also through the second week of July. So we've seen some improvements in some parts of South Dakota and Nebraska because of rainfall, which should definitely benefit the organic feed corn and beans crops there. Other parts of the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas didn't get as much rainfall, so we've seen some drought conditions worsen there. So we're definitely keeping an eye on those states. Also keeping an eye on Nebraska because of the amount of feed corn, beans, and also winter wheat that's produced there. In addition to those states, Wyoming and California, Wyoming and Colorado produced 50,000 acres each of organic winter wheat during 2020. So lastly, the Corn Belt region. The Corn Belt region saw some improvements. They received some heavy rains over the past several weeks, so much of the area is not seeing extreme drought or worse, which is a better story compared to the West Coast and the High Plains region. Some places like Illinois and some regions of Iowa saw some improvements, which will be good for organic feed and beans crops there. On the other hand, however, some parts of northern Iowa still seeing some moderate to severe drought. Also, we'll keep an eye on Minnesota, who is mostly in severe drought, with some regions in extreme drought. And Minnesota produced over 40,000 acres of organic feed corn last year and about 20,000 acres of organic feed soybeans in 2020. Also a fair amount of organic spring wheat. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on many of these states as harvest continues to wrap up.
So as you mentioned, wheat should be coming off about now. I know it is in the area I am in. And with a lot of, I know it's probably too early to say, even with drought conditions persisting, some are improving, some are getting worse in the areas where corn and beans are growing. But I'd just like to hear if there are any implications to the quality of wheat that would be coming off due to these weather conditions, as well as the price. Do you have any insight to that?
So with the extreme drought conditions, we're expecting organic food grade wheat protein levels to be higher. And with these higher protein levels, we're also expecting some organic food grade wheat supply will be pushed over into the feed wheat supply. So currently we're seeing some elevated organic food wheat pricing. According to the Mercaris price survey and our latest monthly market update, we're seeing organic hard red spring prices averaged $12.77 a bushel to end the second quarter of this year. And this gained about $2.38 since the previous year. Along those same lines, we've seen organic hard red winter wheat average $13.60 per bushel, also to end the second quarter of this year. And these prices gained about $2.65 per bushel since the previous year. We're also seeing elevated feed wheat prices. So currently feed wheat is averaging at about $10.11 so far for the first 2 weeks of July. And this is a gain of about 70 cents per bushel since the previous month, also up $1.25 from last year. So organic feed wheat prices tend to follow organic corn, and looking at organic corn is along the same lines. We're seeing organic corn prices average about $9.30 per bushel for organic feed corn for the first 2 weeks of July. Even though the July price is slightly down from the June's average of $9.42, organic feed corn is still coming in up about $1.50 compared to last year. And lastly, but not least, looking at organic feed prices, organic feed soybean prices, which averaged $30.15 over the first 2 weeks of July. So we're continuing to see climbing organic feed soybean prices. And these prices were about even with June and up about $10.70 compared to the previous year.
Wow, $30. I think I've heard of bean prices going up, availability being limited, but this is the first that's cracked $30, and boy, that's interesting to say the least. But as far as the reason for that significant climb in pricing, I know that Ryan in past market reports has mentioned the impact of imports and the price of beans. Is that the continued story with this climbing price, and what is happening with bean imports?
Yeah, these elevated organic soybean feed prices that we're seeing are definitely reflecting a tightening soybean market. So taking a look at organic soybean imports, whole soybean imports saw their largest month since the start of the marketing year during June. We saw U.S. imports reaching nearly 41,000 metric tons. Also, June saw imports from Argentina reach their highest level since June of last year. We also saw imports from the Black Sea region reach about 21,000 metric tons, which was also their highest level since September of last year. But despite June's increase, U.S. organic soybean imports remain lower compared to the 1920 marketing year. However, if July and August of this year achieve similar levels, then the import deficit that has contributed to this soybean supply shortage, we could actually see that significantly improve. So turning to take a look at organic soybean meal imports during June, we've seen meal imports remain higher compared to the previous year, and this was for the 10th month in a row. We've seen imports reach nearly 24,000 metric tons. We did see the first major decline in soybean meal imports from India, which declined to their lowest level since October of 2018, which was down 26% year over year. But ultimately, organic soybean meal imports during June were further supported by additional shipments from Turkey, and we imported about 12,000 metric tons from Turkey. Turning to look at organic whole and cracked corn imports, these were higher again during June and up 44% year over year. So both whole and cracked corn imports were higher, although organic whole imports were mostly sourced entirely from Canada for the second month in a row. Also, we've seen some cracked corn imports sourced entirely from Turkey during June, which was up about 35%. But despite June's increase, we've seen U.S. organic corn imports remain generally reduced over this marketing year. and about down 29% compared to the previous year.
So I just want to go back to bean imports and bean meal imports and just make sure I'm understanding the story here. And I know there's a lot of factors, but just as a bigger picture, it sounds like the imports are starting to climb, but not quite hitting the levels of previous years, which is leading to this deficit in availability of beans and causing the price to increase. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, definitely. July and August, we could see imports continue to climb, but we're mostly seeing elevated soybean prices due to a major supply shortage. So taking a look at organic livestock production, organic broilers for meat production ended the month of June just over about 4.5 million head, and this is the decline of 4% in volumes since May. Also, these volumes were slightly above the volumes we've seen in April, which were 4.3 million. We've also seen these broiler volumes below the previous year's levels by 3% compared to 2020. But even though we've seen this decline, total organic broiler volumes through June of this year remained up compared to the previous year and reached 27 million heads. So this is about a 3% increase year over year. Looking at organic cage-free egg layers, these inventories have continued to maintain their phenomenal growth that we've seen since about September of last year. So egg layer inventories remained at 17.5 million head during June, which was consistent with the previous 4 months. And this volume came in at about 11% above the previous year's level. Also, taking a look at organic fluid milk sales, we've seen fluid milk sales decline during the month of April to 240 million pounds to begin the second quarter of the year. And this was a decline of 6% compared to March. Even though this was a decline compared to March, it was still 6% above February's levels. Also, declines in organic fluid milk sales tend to be seasonal downturns, and we usually see volumes tend to gain more momentum during the second quarter of the year and then also leading into the summer season. So overall, organic fluid milk sales during April were down 5% compared to the previous year.
So the one interesting thing there is the egg layer inventory continuing to rise and hold steady. My question would be, going back to the availability and pricing on beans and bean meal, and the impact on those egg producers that would be the end users. Any poultry operation is a high user of beans and bean meal. And I'm just wondering if you see any indication of that impacting the layer inventory or prices of eggs or anything along those lines. Any insight to what might be happening in that layer market?
Yeah, as these egg layer inventories continue to grow, we can definitely see a more of a reliance on meal and on feed and meal imports. So it'll be interesting to continue to watch the egg layer inventories throughout the remainder of this marketing year and into next, to watch if this growth continues. Egg layer inventories have had phenomenal growth starting in September of last year, where they exceeded 15 million head for the first time and sort of jumped to 17 million and have pretty much stayed there for several months. So it will definitely be interesting to see if they continue to pull off this growth.
The other wild card there too, and I know in the milk market, it's being seen as well that the COVID bump that happened last April of 2020, with more and more people purchasing products at grocery stores, and I assume the same story in the broiler and egg market. There was quite the climb, and now that we're coming back into a sense of more normalcy, I suppose. The story that has been heard, at least on my end, is that there seems to be less grocery store purchasing, more and more people going back out to eat. And that's why I find it interesting that this layer inventory continues to grow, and it certainly will be something. And I wonder if the same thing that's happening in the milk and broiler market might happen in the layer market. But that is something that I think we will take a look at next month, and hope everybody comes back to listen. Megan, thanks a lot for your time and your insight, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thanks, Brian.